So
Mhm.
welcome, Chanel Haley. We are so happy to have you here today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, the work that you're involved in?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here at South Georgia Pride. Actually, my first time attending South Georgia Pride because in the past things have come up. We've had other colleagues that have been there besides myself. But my name is Chanel Haley. I am currently the Gender Policy Manager at Georgia Equality. Been there now over 5 years. And my work is pretty broad. And it's broad for a particular reason because the transgender and non-binary community is actually part of every single community. So I actually am engaged in several different platforms and organizations and methods of actually having and doing visibility within our communities. So my work goes anywhere from doing diversity trainings and about inclusion around gender policies on sexual orientation, and that's with a organization, with either law enforcement, with municipalities, elected officials. Then there's also something I've been working on for the past 3 years. I'm in my fourth year of doing this, where I'm in my third year, wrapping up my third year of doing a leadership training for transgender individuals to step up and be leaders themselves. Because unfortunately, what is happening is when people reach out and there are people that have the spotlight, it's usually the same people all the time. And so it's about creating new individuals and leaders to be able to carry that next torch on from different generations. And so that you're not hearing from the same people and hearing the same tone all the time. And that's just not here in Georgia. That's actually something that a lot of us have tried to do around the country. And I'm, remiss to say that, today is the funeral for one of our icons, Monica Roberts. And that the funeral just happened like literally 2 hours ago. And, she's the one that's been a pioneer in our community. And so, again, that's why it's important that so many of us who are in this work are training and talking about it, educating, and actually getting out the seat so that other people can have a seat to be able to carry the advocacy work on. But I can go on and on about what I do, because again, I work on different levels and have served on different boards and around the advocacy part. So instead of me just rambling about that, let's get into some specifics about what it is that I think that people need to basically definitely know when engaging with trans inclusion. So with saying that, over the past 10 years, and this is, take the trans out, right? We just insert whomever, is that every organization, particularly corporations, have now tried to, set their game up around diversity and inclusion. Of course, the closer we've gotten to 2020, people have really done more emphasis on the inclusion part, because diversity is kind of easy to do, right? You can assess the room or assess the organization, whatever, and then see what group is not presented there. And then go and find that group and then make them part of their group. Inclusion becomes a little more difficult because that's really about, once you have created the diversity, there's making sure that those individuals are then able to actually have a voice. So leadership, as well as the organization, should then be listening and including them within the decisions being made for that community, for the overall community, and then also for that organization. That's something that had not been happening in the past. And of course, that's also tricky too, because even if you then do all the check marks of creating a plan so that happens, it really is more about if that person or those group of people believe that they were chosen because they are smart and what they say is valuable, not just because they think that you were doing that to check a box. So that is a big part of my job when I'm talking about doing diversity and inclusion. I like to also say that the trainings that I do is actually more about humility and not competency. I don't really believe that a person can become competent in learning about someone's lifestyle or an actual culture, someone's lived experience. You're not going to become competent in that as somebody from the outside looking in. So it's more about humility and understanding what the adversities are within our communities. And so when it comes to like being transgender, the adversities are very similar to one that comes with every single other minority group. However, it's on a heightened level, and also it's something that's not focused. So we're talking about in healthcare right now. Healthcare is a big thing that everybody talks about. The access to healthcare is almost nil when it comes to being trans. And that's saying a lot compared to if you looked at 20 and 30 years ago, where even healthcare companies did not cover any trans people whatsoever. We get into terminology, which is a whole other thing we could talk about later on. But at one point, if you ever heard the word transsexual, that was a person of wealth, probably, because that meant that they went to a doctor, they had money to pay to go to a doctor had was able to diagnose them with transsexualism and then be able to prescribe the medication to transition, all out of pocket. Okay, so today we don't really use that terminology too much anymore, but the same remains when it comes to having access to health care, and that's across the board. Even when you do have insurance, where your insurance company may provide some benefits to you around your transition. It then gets muzzled down onto what they consider to be necessary for you to transition, where it's covered by the insurance company. And housing is another one. We would think that housing would be something that absolutely should be covered under HUD, federal laws, but there absolutely still are landlords and property owners that will deny a person simply because they're trans and they don't want living there because of their personal beliefs. Employment has been a big one. And truthfully, employment is the reason in how I got into doing the advocacy work. I see employment as just the bare foundation. There is nothing in any person's life where an employment is not important. You need a job to be able to make money, to house yourself, to feed yourself, to be able to provide yourself with healthcare, everything, clothe yourself, all the necessities you need. You need employment. But our employment discrimination is very high. That's for just gay people, period. And then if you add on Tech One being trans, that makes it even more. And then Tech One being trans and then Black, then a person of color, that's even higher. And so with that, then of course, other adversities that come along with all the things I just named right there, which are, kind of the pinnacle of that, but comes along with trying to survive. Even if I say you're being denied access to getting an apartment, or you don't have enough money or credit to be able to purchase a home, then you want to try to reach out to receive services. Many times social services will deny you. For being transgender, you will be denied access to getting into emergency housing. Emergency housing is usually sex segregated. And so a trans woman will be denied access into a cisgender, a female shelter, but then also denied access to a men's shelter. And the same goes for trans men also. And so it becomes a revolving door. The fight to survive is a real thing that is living within all living beings. And so from that, you might then decide that, well, let me engage in sex work, because from there I can actually then make money and then, take care of things I need to take care of. But of course, what comes with that is other adversities too. It comes with, law enforcement harassing you. It comes with still a housing issue where that you may not be able to get housing, either because you don't have the proper paperwork to be able to put down for an apartment or a property owner to be able to lease to you. You certainly can't buy a house from doing sex work because, again, of the taxes and paperwork that goes along with that. And then, of course, the safety and health concerns that come along with that too, okay? Health concerns. If you're in sex work, you might get offered more money to have unprotected sex, which may lead then also to the STIs that then can happen. And then we're back to healthcare again, of going to the doctor and getting these things checked up or asking about this, and then the doctor discriminating against you. And most people don't realize that doctors actually are legally allowed to discriminate against you. So when it comes to that, if there is an emergency, you get a heart attack, a stab, or whatever, they are legally obligated to stabilize you, but they can walk away and say this person's stabilized, but they're against my beliefs. I don't have to continue to treat them, and that is allowed across the country. And so that happens too. There's actually, I recommend people to look at a documentary that took place in the 90s. It was called Southern Comfort. And that was about a trans man from South Georgia by the name of Robert Eads. That's EADS. And he had ovarian cancer, and he could not find a doctor that would treat him for, the cancer. He had to come all the way up to Atlanta back then, between Atlanta and Savannah, to actually even find a doctor that was willing to treat him. Spoiler alert, Robert has passed away. He died. But that's what came out of that was the Southern Comfort Conference. And so that was around transgender healthcare, that no longer exists today, recently, folded. But the reality of that is that the situation that Robert Eads went through in the 90s, we're still having today in 2020. And so that's why these issues are so important. And when a person thinks, so just a cisgender person, I like to say, the cisgender Southern white woman, and I'm in front of her talking at this, medical facility or even at a corporation about why she should care about Black trans women, right? And it is because of actually that there is some correlations there around issues that we go through. How are you being respected and being treated when you show up to your doctor's office? Are they hearing you? And, a lot of times women across the board are not being heard when we hear doctors. We already know that when it comes to being just a cisgender Black woman, that doctors don't hear them, which is why Black women are 3.5 times more likely to die during childbirth in America in 2020, which is ridiculous, where every other country in the world is actually decreasing child death during childbirth. America is increasing. And again, we're in 2020. We are the leader of the free world, and this is still happening. And so you take being Black and then add on trans to where people then are including their religion and their social beliefs into treating someone, and then it becomes more aggravated around how and what the expectations are. So in my advocacy, what I promote is that people actually speak out. So one thing is when speaking out is reporting that. If there's an avenue ever to report it. Because if someone from Valdosta, Georgia calls me or Georgia Equality and says, hey, I went to the doctor and they were discriminating against me, and they said all these nasty, terrible things, the first question I will always say is, did you document it? And the reason why I would say that, it sounds insensitive, but I would say that because if and when I call them, they will say, well, we didn't get any complaints, so we don't know about that. And I needed a paper trail in order then to go to the next step. Georgia Equality is not, we don't employ lawyers, we're not suing on your behalf. This is not, a law center. But if I'm going to advocate, if I'm going to do any kind of campaign around this, want to talk to directors and policymakers there, I need to be able to show and say, hey, I got 5 calls or 10 calls or 1 call that says that on this date, they came for a service and this is what they were told by this person at your facilities. What are you going to do about that? Is that policy going to change? Do you not care about all of your clients? And that's across the board, whether it is in healthcare, if it's in a corporation, run employment, law enforcement, whatever it is, going through the proper procedures of reporting is extremely important when it comes to advocacy. Then we can move on to the next step. The next step around advocacy is around policy, right? And so this is the one that's probably the most frustrating to the masses, because a lot of times the first thing they want to do is let's protest, let's shaking things up, let's stop their money or the positive attention they get, fill in the blank, whatever, right? And that's all fine. I don't disagree with that, and that's good to do. But you also need to have in place already written policy of what is that you're asking for when you're going to them. Going to them and telling them, just defund the police, or just to, stop going to this business. Well, is there a resolution? What is the resolution that we're doing to help the community? So that means that you're telling people stop going to this business because they discriminated against LGBTQ people until they do this, and this, and this. Then where are the demands at? And then also really important is knowing who to give those demands to, right? It's very important to understand and know where the buck stops and how to present that, and then make sure that you have a checklist and be realistic, because we can start with a very high bar, but know what it is that we really need in order to chip away at those blocks. Because a lot of this is systematic, I found, as a person who has traveled around the state of Georgia, not just the state of Georgia, but around the country, but particularly the state of Georgia, to a lot of small towns, a lot of rural areas. And I always make a point when I go out for a work assignment that when my work assignment is technically complete for that day or whatever, I always make a point to go out that evening to a local bar or club, something like that, right? Not LGBTQ related at all. And talk to the people who live there about, and ask them about their feelings around, trans, Black people, gay, local events and stuff, things that I do that they had no idea about. And surprisingly, what I come to find out or realize is that people are not inherently bigots or racist or they're just not doing it on purpose. It's more about how they what they've been exposed to. And typically, when I talk about myself or what I do, what my organization does, they're usually surprised because they didn't know it exists, and they're fine with it. So that's where the visibility comes in at. That's also part of advocacy to me, is that making sure that we have representation on every corner, every front, all the time. Again, as I was saying before, I introduced myself and what it is that I do. I could go on and on, about this for hours, because there is not a country, a state, a major city, a job industry, a political party, a race that does not have trans people in it. And so it's important that that's known, because there's people who actually think, because they think they have never met a trans person, and maybe they have not, will assume that that does not affect me because that's not really part of my community. But it is part of your community. So I'm part of several different communities, right? I am Black, I'm trans, identify as a woman, my socioeconomic status, the work that I do, even to when it comes to my eye color, that's a whole different thing by itself. Also, right, the complexion of my skin, even within my own race, these are all different communities that I'm actually part of. And when you're part of all these different communities, then you also are part of your neighbor's community, okay? And so it's important to let them know that. So when we were advocating for something, whether it is around a law and how voting should be and what benefits us all, or it's really just about your personal opinions and the census, for instance, of how money comes in, it's important to let them know about how all the decisions really affect all of us. And I am included in your decision too. And so that to me is really the core about advocacy comes that, and it is a delicate balance. It's a delicate balance of making sure that's done. I recommend people always do that in a safe environment to where they feel safe. I don't, everybody cannot go down to, some small town or somewhere rural and anywhere they're at and start talking about, yeah, I'm trans and you should like me. And there absolutely might be consequences around that. Also, when it comes to organizations interested in doing the inclusion piece that I talked about before and wanting to make sure that there is a voice at the table. A lot of times, let me start off from the beginning. Back when I first started out, we were not talked about at all as a community. In fact, if you go back to when Marsha Johnson, Silva Rivera, it was not only not talked about, but it was shunned upon that, being trans is what's hurting the entire gay community, and we don't have rights because of y'all. So we went past that, to then where, well, you know, we could talk about them a little bit and include them in some things, okay? Then it went into now where there are some funders that actually are even giving money to employ trans people, but it's a very few. They still are not really giving money when they are Black or minority trans led. Those are still the ones that still have an issue around that. And then, but still, the entire community, you know, again, after marriage equality happened, we're like, we can focus on trans people now, I guess. They still are wanting people to tell their journey stories and share and talk about these things. However, trans people are not being compensated for that. And it's kind of the same way of where we have always been part of the advocacy and the march and the fight, the same way that all gay people have been part of the march and fight when it came to civil rights. But when the history is written, we're usually written out. And so because of that, compensation is quite important when we're talking about including somebody into that. So I do recommend that if you're going to start and you are really going to want to advocate and do your inclusion, do that. And so that's done by several ways, right? That's why it's important to actually hire trans people to work for your organizations. It's important to acknowledge them when you're doing your writings or you're telling somebody's story, that you include and say that this came from a trans person, and then say if this was, you know, a Black trans person, a Latino trans person, an Asian American trans person, because those experiences are different, and because also it's not heard of from many times. Also to say if it's a trans man, a lot of times trans men feel left out of the conversation. And then if that's not the case, then of course, when we have, you know, stipends or honorariums or whatever for talking, I know that's a big thing that is in a battle when it comes to universities, because they always say they don't have any money, but universities are pretty rich. They have money. They can really afford that type of thing. Way more than like a nonprofit organization can, right? But they really should be doing that too, because their students are not just, they're learning from their experience. Which takes me to something else that I do when it comes around advocacy. Particularly again in healthcare, is that we want it so that our community can experience or have the opportunity to where we're creating the path for harm reduction. And the way of doing that is by going actually into the universities and teaching the actual students, the medical students. So before they actually become a doctor and have opportunity to discriminate or to hear or get into a practice of doing things inappropriately, let's get them actually in the classroom. And that's the same thing when it comes to pretty much across the board with any field. I do that now when it comes up, not just that, but when it comes to corporate. ERGs now, you know, come in, let's talk about what you need to do around your diversity and inclusion that includes trans people also. You know, we're at a good place now to where they're starting to include that, because so much before was only focused on race. And it got to a point, you know, especially prior to, before this administration, to where people understood and knew that jokes or comments around race was just wrong in the workplace. We got to a point around that. I think that we probably went backwards because of this administration, but now people are also wanting to include that when it comes to the LGBT community. Another thing that I've done, which was separately outside of my job, because Georgia Equality is nonpartisan, but I still engage. Product from Georgia Equality, I work for the Georgia House of Representatives. I actually worked for Republicans and Democrats, but what got me into that job was working for a Democrat that got elected, and then from there doing work with Democratic Party. And so this previous summer, I was elected to be a delegate to the Democratic National Convention, reading the platform that was being proposed for over the next 4 years for the Democratic Party. I noticed that there was nothing that was said around the trans community in relation to criminal justice reform. Whereas we were talked about for being transgender and non-binary, which was also not only part of the platform, but is also part of the bylaws. And they specifically do mention non-binary. There's even a seat reserved for running to be a delegate as non-binary for the Democratic platform. But when it came to criminal justice, no, nothing was said, which I thought was odd and thought really should have been talked about. This was a summer where we had all the civil unrest around people, people of color, particularly Black people, Black men, Black women who have been who have been unarmed and shot by police officers. We already know that trans women, the death rate for them is pretty high. Would like to point out that what you're seeing and hearing about trans women being murdered is not new. I transitioned in 1998. The number of trans women that's been murdered is not jumping up. The difference is that the media is just now reporting it and you're just now hearing about it. And so you're now commenting on it, okay? I've known trans women that's been murdered unsolved since before I transitioned, again, back in the 90s. And so I'm happy now to see that there's been a spotlight on that and that actually law enforcement was even, investigating, and that the media is now even not dead-naming them most of the time. It actually is saying this is a woman or this is a man versus before it was always, man in a dress found dead somewhere, if it made the news at all, okay? But because of all that, again, why wasn't there policies I thought that should have been put in place around the platform, Democratic platform? And so submitted an amendment to that to make sure that we were included, and it was accepted and approved. And so if you are a Democrat and you want to read about that, you can Google the 2020 Democratic platform, and the criminal justice platform that I had put in there is on page 36 to make sure. And to be very clear about this, when people, I know there's a lot of people who's not happy about the Democratic nominee, not liberal enough for them, whatever, but this is bigger than just the presidency, right? There certainly will be across the country prosecutors and judges that are Democrats. It is their job to then still carry out this platform because that's the field they work in. So it goes way bigger than just some of the presidency. This is actually a 4-year plan around making sure the inclusion in there. And so that was why that's important for me around advocacy. Are there any other questions I should say? Because I know we're like 10 minutes away and stuff before closing up. So I want to give you any opportunity to ask any questions about any particular topic or approach to something around the community that maybe I haven't spoke about yet.
I have to say I really appreciate, because one of the things that I'm learning so much, it's even in the past 20 minutes or so of you talking, is that a lot of times when we think about the LGBT community, we think of same-sex marriage or we think of bathroom bills. And it's so much more. It's so much like criminal justice reform, it's healthcare, it's everything, and it's very critical needs within the community that isn't often talked about. So I just want to first thank you for that. And I'm gonna create some space. So for Dylan, Peter, do you have any questions for Chanel?
I just want to start saying, I really appreciate everything you're talking about. I mean, some of it's really eye-opening. It's so obvious, now that when you say it, but I don't think about is the recorded transgender men and women that were killed, and how it was only recently recorded. Like, I didn't even think about, for years they may have been transgender, but it was never recorded. And I didn't put 2 and 2 together until that happened, or until you said that. And I do have a side question. So I'm in the MFT program at Valdosta State for therapy, and I was curious to know, for someone who's cisgendered, if they're seeing an LGBTQ client, what is like the most important factors you'd say for you to feel heard in the therapy session, or just in general? To help.
So
just to give a little bit of background, when Dylan says MFT, he means marriage and family therapy.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, you have to be more clear about that. Yeah, okay. But still, so with any business, especially when it comes to healthcare where you're seeing clients, so what should be done first, I think, is about the first line of defense, the frontline staff. even when it comes to you and your dialogue around when you have a correspondence. So are you putting pronouns in your correspondence so that that person who's reading it understands and knows that you are actually, that you care about making sure that that I'm not being misgendered and that I feel accepted. Another thing that you can do is, so like I said, with frontline staff are the restrooms, if you have, any restroom in signage in there, is your signage being images of male and female, right? So that's becomes an issue. For some reason, when we have in a lot of healthcare facilities, they actually are usually single stall restrooms, which really should just mean that anybody who wants to use the restroom, but you don't think about that if you're putting this image up here and saying this is only for men, this is only for women, that of course can trigger. And then also realizing that then what happens with a non-binary individual, right? So that right there will tell them that they don't feel comfortable coming into your space. Another thing about it is that when they come up into the counter to speak to the person to check in, I recommend, and this is something that you can buy that is extremely inexpensive, is just some name tags, some right-on sticky name tags that actually have on there the pronoun usage, okay? Now, where this gets tricky at around this is because a lot of times when people ask this question or they want to do this, they are doing it and thinking about it just for a trans person. And so they want to perk up when they see a trans person, oh, let me go and prove to them that I am trans competent and I know all these things. But that's wrong, because now you single that person out. You should be doing this as your practice all the time. Everybody there, cis and trans, non-binary, should all be wearing the sticker, we should all introduce ourselves with our pronouns, because then that way that I know that if I'm walking in, you're not doing it just to impress me and that you just clocked me and now I feel uncomfortable. Or so if you're going to ask me what my name, my pronoun is, I think you should ask everybody in the room what the pronoun is. So setting the tone from the get-go is kind of what would make things a lot more smoothly. Starting with, of course, your signature in your emails, and then, like I said, when you come your frontline defense. And also what that does is psychologically, therapists should know this, is that now you are training yourself to be able to think about doing that all the time because you're getting in the practice of doing that. So eventually that becomes just the norm that you do, not just in your practice, but probably throughout your life.
Thank you so much for that. That's really helpful. I really appreciate that.
Any other questions?
No question. I just want to thank you and appreciate you speaking today. And I'm also cisgender in that sense, so I just appreciate just having the moment to learn. I do have I have a coworker who is trans, and I try to support with the whole COVID thing. We're no longer in the office, so I don't see them as often. But I do appreciate just hearing what you discussed today.
Before we go, I wanted to bring up one more thing, especially if anybody's read my bio and the work that I've been engaged in. I do want to point out about the need, the importance, and how also it's advocacy to be able to participate in citizen, boards and authorities and commissions. So, I remember in 2018, a couple years ago, when the country really got involved and was saying, I want to do something. I just hate what's happening right now, and I want to see it change. So we saw a lot of people that ran for office, and when you asked them, they said they did it because that was their advocacy, which is fine. I think they learned pretty quickly running for office is a lot more difficult, a lot more expensive than they probably thought. Of course, we all know about protesting is an option also, but I want people to know that, also serving on boards or commissions is also a way of doing advocacy too. It's having a seat at the table and making sure that there is change that can be made to where it's about the policy and moving forward. Many times when you are serving, whether you're appointed by an elected official or whether it is a community board from your organization, that you can just create yourself if you want to. These people end up having the ear of the media. And so, and also the ear of elected officials. What you can get changed and done by being part of that is so important. And so I think, and it's my hope that when people are in the position to be able to appoint or recommend, that you should always be thinking about having a trans person there also. And I understand and know that there's some people who would think about this, and it is true that we're back to checking a box around inclusion, right? And that's something that I think that person who accepts or rejects the invitation has to feel with themselves. I absolutely know for a fact I have been invited and been part of certain boards simply because I am transgender. I was told that from one of the times, right? But what I went into knowing also is that I can use this as a stepping stone to be able to make the change that needs to be made in order for then the entire community to then be able to benefit and also bring an extra share to the table, okay? And from that time, when I sat on that City of Atlanta board, I also got to change the city ordinance around that, create the entire thing, which led to this, led to this, led to this, led to something else. So please think about this, not just people listening that are interested to getting involved in advocacy, but that's one avenue you can do. And you can do that again by being engaged, by making it very known to elected officials, to making it very known to EDs of nonprofit organizations, making it known to other community or organizations that you want to be involved that way. And then I want to make sure that, EDs know, elected officials know that they really should be making sure that this has become more inclusion. Because we're talking about community advisory boards, right? Or any kind of community board, there should be representation from the entire community. And sometimes, many times we're left out of the conversation, or is the conversation, but have no vote during the conversation, which is even worse. So think about that as another avenue that we should be thinking about when it comes to advocacy. I recommend that at least every person serves on one board in their entire lifetime at some points. Okay, I don't care if it's your neighborhood association, Rotary Club, some HR thing at work, something. To have that experience of understanding and knowing what it's like to create policies for your community, and that can not just benefit you, but also for people coming after you.
Thank you. And I want to ask, to piggyback on that, and when we're engaging in advocacy, something that you said that really resonated was this idea of humility rather than competence. So I want to follow up on that and just ask a bit about when you are engaging in advocacy, and especially if you're new to it, and the importance of having that humility, how to do that, and how to sort of make sure that you are like maybe being very mindful of how you especially when you're cisgender and when you have privileges that blind you to seeing certain things.
Well, of course, so that goes into play again with defining the psychology of inclusion anyway. And so again, if you are now to doing your inclusion and then humility, actually those go hand in hand. I mean, they're the same thing. I'm not going to go, I don't go in, when I do my presentations, it's a story I'm telling. I'm telling you first about, well, here's terminology. I'm telling you that first because I'll use the terminology. I want everybody here to know about that. But then I'm also going to tell you about some backgrounds about why I'm here today, or actually why this conversation even happened. What happened to where we are a minority group, okay? Then the next thing about that is why I'm here in front of you today. Because let's keep it real, most of the organizations that I'm part of or that I'm in front of today would not have asked this question 2 years ago because they didn't care. But there's something that has shifted in our country to put a spotlight into where they're asking, okay? So let me be very blunt and clear about that. But then I don't want to confuse people and think that everything's nice and hunky-dory. So there's some negative in there also about, what's been said online, who's targeting, so that we're still a target, what needs to go through. When I talked about earlier the adversities, that's humility. Let me be very clear that I might be living my truth, but my truth comes with huge consequences that are out of my control just for me being who I am. So understanding that. And then I like to present and say, well, here are some excellent policies that you can actually implement to do this harm reduction within organizations. And I usually will make it so that it caters to your specific organization. Because if I'm doing housing, emergency housing, one organization have more money where they can actually build a new restroom or, you know, change their shower settings versus another one who has no money at all, who can only put up a curtain or either just change the showering schedule, so to speak, right? So that's the humility about it. It's like really getting up to understand where this person is coming from. That's different than what you're used to, because you know we all live our life, and you myself, as a Black trans woman who transitioned again in 1998, another Black trans woman who transitioned today, how we see the world is very different. Our experiences are different, and what we accept is different. This generation is very I'm not accepting that. Whereas mine did, right? For me, I was honestly say pronouns was not a big deal. I was like, that's not an issue. It actually was kind of a test that was done. You know, again, going back into the way doctors treated you, your peers treated you, that was more important. But now we are being so more intentional about being inclusive across the board. And that starts with the allies first acknowledging and demanding that, so that they're in the practice when they do meet a trans person. Because you're going to see a cis person every single day in your everyday life, right? You may see a trans person maybe once a week, or who knows, once a month or once a year. But you need to be in that practice already of how to act and respond when you do see that trans person.
Thank you. Any other questions for Chanel? Okay. So thank you everyone for joining today. We can go ahead and wrap up here. I will be posting this video along with some resources, especially about educating ourselves on policy and advocacy, because this is just, you know, it's a continuous learning process. So, and we also have to do the work to educate ourselves. So I'll be including those links with this video. Thank you to our guest speaker, Chanel. It's amazing to have you.